Good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is Don't Let Recruitment Ruin Your Inspection. My name's Karen Penfold and I'm the Human Resources Manager for Code, and a big part of my role is providing HR advice on a vast range of employee issues for over 2,500 iComply members. And the reason that we are choosing this topic today is because we receive a high number of calls from members in this area struggling with their recruitment, and also it's a big area where practices are currently failing their inspections. So the aims and objectives for today is to increase understanding and help practices prepare for inspection. So object to explore code research and to discuss key documents and pre-employment checks you must have in your personal files to meet the regulations, and also to explore how the iComply system helps practices to meet those standards. Okay, so learning outcomes for the webinar is to train your team to spot some key compliance issues relating to recruitment, to review your compliance of the recruitment process with increased confidence, and to improve your understanding of what inspectors are actually looking for as well when they're relating to the recruitment process. Okay, so the session content, we've got a little bit to get through in the next sort of 40 minutes. Now questions, please ask questions at the end. Myself and Alex will also be available for those. We are going to be looking at what the CQC inspector is looking for relating to your recruitment process and your personnel files and your pre-employment checks. This is relating to the Schedule 3 Health and Social Care Act, which I'm sure you all know inside and out. Some of the key failure points where practices are falling down, and this is based on our own research. And then we'll break that down into the recruitment process itself and sort of go through that step by step to see, hopefully look at where areas can be for to help you reduce the risk of falling in this area. So we will just touch on some legal issues in regards to the Equality Act, but literally it's just touching on that because that's a big subject in itself. So we will leave with some actions for next week for yourselves, and also talk about some upcoming template releases as well that we're going to be releasing on iComply. Okay, so the key failure points. Now, this comes out of Code's research over 1,000 inspection reports that were being inspected. Now, that research did actually show that over a third of practices were actually failing or falling down in this area, breaches in their recruitment process and their checks that they've been carrying out as well, or not carrying out. And what now these two quotes here, this is what it will state on the inspection report, and what it's actually saying is that you need to review systems to ensure the practice's recruitment policy and procedures are suitable and the recruitment arrangements are in line with Schedule 3 of the Health and Social Care Act, and also ensure necessary employment checks are in place for all staff and the required specified information in respect to persons employed by the practice is held. So what that's actually saying, that's just a bit of jargon there as well, but let's just break that down into what they're actually finding is they're going to practices, and where they are failing is they are checking your employment, your personnel files, and they are not able to locate missing documentation. And this could be, when we look at Schedule 3 later, that missing documentation, we'll go into more detail. It could be references, could be DBS checks haven't been carried out, or inductions, but also it's also saying that they're not finding that you've got a recruitment policy or a way of managing your recruitment in place which actually helps you meet the requirements and the regulations. Okay, and what we're going to do with all our new policies, we've got a number I'm going to go through now that we have on iComply which will help you meet these regulations, but also talk about at the end of the session upcoming ones that will even further help you reduce the risk of falling down in this area. Okay. So let's look at the recruitment process itself, and this is just to make you think about what is recruitment. Now, I remember working for a manager some time ago, not particularly effective manager, but he used to say to me the key to success is to surround yourself with the best possible people. And that's what recruitment should really be, a critical business function. Just think about how much time you spend on recruitment, and if your awareness, do you have a high staff turnover? What is it costing you? And I do receive a lot of calls from members who have slipped up during the recruitment process and then working out how to untangle those situations. It's not just costly in terms of the time you spent recruiting or training, it's the impact on staff morale. And also think about your reputation to patients coming in and they're seeing different faces at reception every other week. So really put it at the top of your pile, as getting the right people in place will be crucial to overall performance of your practice. So if we just break down some of the key stages of the recruitment process, and this is linked into what the regulations are asking you to have in place with having your robust recruitment policy in place. So we need to look at that step by step. So what the regulation, again, this comes from the Health and Social Care Act, and this is Regulation 18, and this is linked to staffing. So what it's saying is, it's asking for sufficient numbers of suitably qualified, competent, skilled and experienced staff to make sure that they can meet people's care and treatment needs, and therefore meet the requirements of Section 2 of these regulations. Now, these are the fundamental standards, or the key lines of inquiry, as they say. And in essence, what it's actually telling you is that as a provider, a practice owner, what you should have in place is a system, a robust system that makes sure that you have the right skilled, the right mix of skills and the skilled people that actually meet your service users' needs, and ultimately that they're also kept safe in that safe environment. So how are you going to do that? We did touch on, so one of the areas is not having a policy in place. Now, we have spent a long time in making sure that we have a robust recruitment policy and procedure in place for our members. And this is something we regularly review and update as well. And it's so important because your policy is not a simple policy to do. It's actually what you've got to consider is the whole recruitment process from the beginning to right through to the end. So, and it should state in there clearly how you decide when to recruit, who you recruit, where you advertise, your shortlisting, your interview setup, what pre-employment checks you're doing. So another reason you should consider having this policy in place to make sure you cover that, and also right the way through to the job offer stage and from there as well, which we will look at these steps as we go through. So why do you need to have a policy? Yes, you need to meet the regulations, so that helps in one way. But also any policies, and I know I'm in HR, so I love a policy, but you need to, what it will give you is a framework, and it makes sure that you're being consistent, that your managers who are implementing the policy are doing things in the same way, that you're being transparent, and also you're being legally compliant. And throughout your policy, you need to also consider anti-discrimination legislation as well in terms of the Equality Act, and I mentioned earlier, we will look at that as well. Okay. So the start of the recruitment policy and process really is thinking about, so somebody leaves, what do you do? Is it, at the moment, do you see it as an opportunity, because it really is an opportunity to think about how you're doing things, or is it a knee-jerk reaction that you think, okay, someone's left, we just immediately need to replace them? I always think this is where you do need to evaluate. Can you restructure? Can you actually recruit within, promote within and develop? Or do you need to do new job descriptions and person specifications? There's an awful lot to think about. And then it's moving on. Once you've narrowed that scope down and decided exactly what the role is you need, from there it's where you advertise. Now, a good tip is, I always think, look at where you've had the most success in your staff, where have you got the best candidates from and your employees, because that's a good place to go back to as well. What did you do differently there? Could be luck, I know some of that's involved, but it's a good idea to think, well, that worked well before. There's also the options, I mean, everyone on the job sites now, professional networking sites, local colleges and universities, and there's obviously a big emphasis on apprenticeships now as well. And I'll mention it later with our contracts, but we do have a new apprenticeship contract as well that we're releasing this month. So, and when you do advertise, really think about the advert that you put out. Make sure it's not woolly at all, and also you need to consider it's not discriminatory at all, but you really need to make it clear what the job is, what the salary is, where it's based, is it a fixed term contract, what's the role involved. So if you're looking for somebody with compliance knowledge, make it clear, or iComply, if they've used iComply before, make it clear on there that that's what you're looking for. And this will then help you to shortlist your applicants. And this is a stage of the process that you should have at least 2 people involved in shortlisting. And the way to do this is against the criteria that you have set in your job description and your person specification, and make records of how you've shortlisted, again, against these as scoring involved. Okay, so which moves on to, once you've done your shortlisting, you'll be able to identify the most suitable candidates for interview. And this is so important to make sure you're prepared for an interview. We have interviewing forms that you can use on iComply as well as the shortlisting section as well. And it comes down to making sure that there's at least 2 of you on the panel to do the interviewing and being well prepared beforehand. There's nothing that you've got to think about reputation as well. If you've got a candidate coming in for an interview and they're left waiting for ages, or the actual interview itself is ill prepared, it doesn't paint a good picture of the practice that they're coming into as well. So prepare your questions, think about, and we suggest here, have open questions. So what you're looking for is for them to give you real life examples of their experiences and their skills relevant to the job role. So you're asking questions that don't just involve a yes and no answer. And this will give you much more of an overview to see if they are suitable for the position. Keep good records of the interview notes, because this is something that the Schedule 3 I mentioned will be looking for, that you've got interview notes from and that you've asked questions that are actually really delving into this person's suitability for the role. But also be aware from the employment side that an anti-discrimination legislation, just to note, be careful what you actually write on the interview notes, because they can request, through data protection, they can request to see this, and in tribunals they can actually use this as evidence in some areas if they feel that a discrimination issue has happened. So just be aware of that. So that from your interview stage, you should be able to select, again, based on skills and abilities and suitability for the role. Be careful if you are making a job offer verbally, which most of us quite often do, because that is as legally binding as if you were putting it into writing to them. So make it clear when you make a job offer that it is a conditional job offer, so subject to satisfactory references and all the pre-employment checks that are involved in this role. So pre-employment checks, now I must state, and again we receive a number of calls from members that ask, do they have to have things in place before the employment? Now I have to stress it is pre-employment checks, so it's key that these must be done before the employee actually starts work in the practice. And this is an essential part of the recruitment process, which is why we have a very thorough induction sheet as well, that lists the pre-employment side. And I will talk about later in the new and up and coming templates as well, that will also help you in this process to make sure you're covering everything. But this is really the start of your employee's record, their personnel file. This is the beginning, and build that. So it's an essential part, and also from the legal side, not talking about the regulations, but it's actually illegal to appoint anybody who doesn't have the right to work in the UK. So this is a key employment check that you must do. There is quite a lot of information around what documents you need to ask for, proof of ID, and we have the right to work guidance notes on iComply that will help you with that. If you don't do it, just be aware there is penalties involved. If you employ anybody without carrying out a right to work check, this could actually result in a £20,000 fine per employee. Be aware of that. Or if you knowingly do it, then this could be a risk of a 2-year prison sentence and possible unlimited fine, is what they mention as well. So just make a note of that, make sure you have that awareness. So moving over to Schedule 3, so these are, and this comes down, one of the comments it says is ensure recruitment checks are recorded and evidence is documented. So you can be recording them on the induction records. However, that's not good enough if this EQC inspector comes in and doesn't actually see any evidence of any of these documents. So that's the critical part, and that's where some of the practices are falling down in this area. Okay. So what do the Schedule 3 requirements say? Now, this is relating to the information required in respect of persons employed or appointed for the purposes of a regulated activity. So yes, it's a bit of a mouthful from the Schedule 3. What it's actually telling you to do, and what we need to comply with, is asking you to make sure as a first step that you have proof of identity, including a recent photograph. And this could be passport, or it could be your driver's license, those types of things, but you must have an up-to-date photograph. On top of that, you should have your enhanced DBS certificates and checks done as well. Now, this isn't a certificate that you should actually keep on file. You need to show that you've had proof of this, and this could be recording the certificate reference number that you have, but you're not able to keep copies of the actual original DBS in the employee's file. Certainly not, if you do decide to do that, not longer than 6 months, and you have to justify why you have that in place. Now, references, you should have at least 2 references. Now, these can be standard or clinical, depending on the role, and they should really involve the one being from the most recent employer is important. Also, you should show under Schedule 3 that you've got evidence of GDC registration. Now, this could be in whatever format they give this to you in the certificate. Also, you can also check it online now as well. Now, the full employment history, including written explanations for any gaps in employment. Now, this is an area that has been picked up on quite a few times in the inspection reports we've seen. And it does, this can be covered in making sure you've got the CVs on file. We've got applications on iComply, and it's a good idea to have that everybody complete an application as well, because that actually covers standard information that needs to be on there. So I'd recommend doing that. And also, if the interview notes that you have, you should have asked them if there are gaps in employment, that could be covered in your interview notes. So that's another reason you've got that written audit trail to clarify that you have done your due diligence there. And also their CPD certificates, so you need proof of those as well, copies of those on file. Now, the confidential medical questionnaire, we'll look at the Equality Act in a moment, because this is something that you should only ask them to complete once the job offer has been made and not before that. Okay. Now, there are, just before I go on for the next slide, there are a number of other things that we haven't mentioned that's not actually covered in Schedule 3. However, there's still requirements under other areas, and that's your proof of immunisations and indemnity. Now, we cover those within iComply, it's covered in our inductions that we do, and also you'll see that it's actually in the contracts of employment as well, and also the self-employed contracts. Along with the fit and proper persons check and action list. So it is all covered. It's just this is a specific area that Schedule 3 are looking at. Which takes us over just slightly off topic, but I mentioned inductions. Now, I think these are so important to do, and I know from, again, speaking to members and some of the reports that have come through, that CQC inspectors are picking up that the inductions or proof of inductions are missing in employee files. And I know that's difficult when you've had an employee that's maybe been with you for some time and may not have thought it was relevant, but it may be something to consider as a refresher induction, that you cover certain policies and bring that all together for team members as well. And that's another area. And it's not about ticking the box. It's a good opportunity just to refresh employees' minds with their staff inductions and policies that they may not have looked at, or you will look at through the activities in iComply as well. But it's a good idea because it will cover everything, and it also gives you that checklist there that we've got incorporated to make sure that you aren't missing any of the pre-employment checks. Okay, so Regulation 19, another one from the Health and Social Care, which is a bit of a mouthful. This relates to the fit and proper persons. And what it's saying is selection and interview processes should assess the accuracy of applications and be designed to demonstrate candidates' suitability for the role, while meeting the requirements of the Equality Act 2010 in relation to pre-employment health checks. Now, I mentioned earlier about the pre-employment health checks, the confidential medical questionnaires. This is relating to doing your fit and proper persons check and action lists, which we have on iComply. And it does, in this situation, it refers to team members as well. And team members also include the self-employed in this situation. So what it's asking you to do is that you've checked not just their health-wise, but also if there are any mental health or any history there that you've got concerns of, that they are safe to be working on carrying out regulated activity. Okay, so the Equality Act 2010, now this is actually a piece of legislation that's mentioned throughout the regulations. To be honest with you, it is a webinar in itself. It's a huge topic to cover. So we're just going to touch on it now because the actual recruitment process, this runs through it, or, anti-discrimination legislation is actually, you're at risk of making this error throughout every step of the recruitment process. Sorry about that. So we're just talking about the Equality Act 2010. Now, this was brought together, whereas previously there was lots of different pieces of legislation, but essentially it's protecting certain groups of people from discrimination in the workplace and in the wider society. And it does relate to 9 protected characteristics. And the key thing for yourselves to be aware of is that it does affect everyone responsible for running a business or a service. So no matter how many employees you have, you are responsible for making sure that you are compliant with this Act. And it also, all self-employed team members as well are protected under the Equality Act, so be aware of that. And it was really brought in when we look at recruitment. It's to make sure where lots of disabled people were finding they're being unfairly screened out when they're applying for jobs. One of the reasons with the questionnaires, the actual confidential medical questionnaires coming, was to be asked after and not before, so that it gives them more of an opportunity to find a job, with you and be seen at actually interview stage. So the protected characteristics I mentioned are, there's 9 involved. These are some that you probably are familiar with. Now, through recruitment, there is the risk of discriminating against any of these groups at any stage of the process, through to the advert that you put out, through to your shortlisting, your interviews, and the job offer references stage as well. So I'm not going to go through it all now, because as I said, it will be a webinar that we'll do at a later date, but I can just really asking that you familiarise yourselves with this topic and the policies on it as well. So which leads us into the key policies, and these are the ones that after the webinar today, and we'll look at future actions, is just we've got all of these on iComply as well that you're probably familiar with, and some of these are being updated as well, taking to changes. But during your recruitment, these are the ones that you should really make sure that any line managers, anyone involved in the recruitment process, are aware of these. So if you can, I recommend having a look and refreshing yourselves with these policies after the session. So actions for yourselves next week. So please ensure that your recruitment and selection policy is robust and comprehensive. That's something you do need in place. So review the one that you have, that you are using, that you're happy with it. Review your current employee personnel files. Good idea to do an audit gap analysis of these against the Schedule 3, and have ensure all the required information is available for the CQC inspector, including those gaps in employment, that you've investigated those and they are recorded on file. Train your managers to avoid discriminatory questions in the interview process and to make appointment decisions on the basis of ability only. So that is a weighty one, making sure their awareness of the Equality Act, but also when you're doing your shortlisting, using the forms will help you to do this. Using job descriptions and person specs will also make sure that you're only shortlisting and appointing people based on their skills and experiences as well. Okay. So we have upcoming releases, which is quite exciting. You may have seen our members on our newsletters that we've been talking about some new contracts that will be released, and I'm quite excited about these because we've been working on them for some time, and we're very proud of the new ones that will be coming out, and they'll be released this month, I believe. And please give me, those contracts. We've got a new 0 hours contract in there. Staff terms and conditions is also updated, and the apprentice one that I've been talking about as well, which is a really useful contract if you are looking to take on an apprentice, as well as all our self-employed associate contracts. So in hand with that, we've got some new job descriptions that will be released in the next 2 months. Now, some of them are requests from members and demands that have wanted these new ones coming out. So we've worked on those, and they'll be good to have your feedback on those as well when we release them. So the next item is something that we've been working on for some time, and it's in line with the Schedule 3 requirements as well. And it's an additional new document, so it's pre-employment and personal file checklist. So this will help you not just when you have a new employed team member, permanent team member, but also we're having a checklist for the self-employed associates, what you need to make sure you have in place for both sides, that you're doing your due diligence, and you're in line with the Schedule 3. And this is, again, something we felt was needed to really assist you in this area. And again, I get a lot of calls on this area as well to say, what do we do next? And on top of that, we have updated the induction and probation checklist. That includes more details about checklists on the immunisation side, and indemnity as well as in there, so lots of new documents that will be coming out shortly. In essence, we have about 50 new HR documents that we are looking to release. So yes, we've been very busy on those, looking to release in the next 2 months. So we're quite excited about that as well, so further tools for you. Thank you for watching our webinar today, I hope you found it both useful and informative. If you'd like to see any of our previous webinars, you can go to our YouTube channel. Now, if you'd like any further information about what we've discussed today or any of our products, then please give us a call on 01409 254 354. Thank you.